for a certain length of time and then for not knowing how things would unfold. So then, as things did indeed unfold, it came time to create the next couple of months of programs. And so this first date was open and other dates were open, and the board, and we talked to folks and see who's interested in presenting, and just who feels they have something that they want to bring forth. And anyway, it just sort of emerged, and I think this group could agree, in cascades of synchronicity that are really quite awe-inspiring, as far as I'm concerned, for what I wish to share and what I wish for us to share this evening. As of last night, going to bed, my thought was, I really don't have this together. I'm not sure how I'm going to say anything at all. And then, of course, as most of you know, the other phase, which is, do I have anything at all to say anyway? And then back to, oh yes, there's something. And then it's, oh yes, there's many things. And then it's like, trust the process. So I went to bed in a very inchoate state, other than the fact that I've been thinking of this presentation 24/7, sleeping and dreaming for quite some time now. The year 2020 was always a big one in my mind. I have to say, for another topic, I could speak of my own personal sense of premonitions, that 2020 wasn't going to quite work out the way most folks had planned. Although, again, that doesn't take a tremendous amount of perspicacity on any of our parts to look at 2020 and say it's going to be a very big year. Said so at the Gibser Jung conference last October, as everyone did. That was what we were talking about. At any rate, as we came to June 4th, 2020, and I'm on the schedule with what has appeared, and that's going to be the story this evening. The story of this evening is the story of this evening. That's a recursion. June 4th, 2020, convened as we are in the cinemasthetic field. First of all, yes, I think it is appropriate, and it can be the form of prayer, as one might see fit, to acknowledge our privilege of being together tonight. Everybody has a device that enables this miraculous communication that we're experiencing, and for me, it is pure miracle. We're all healthy enough to be at the screen. We're all breathing. We can kneel if we want to. And all of us can watch birds if we want to. So privileged we are. Today was the funeral of George Floyd. I could not watch anything. I don't think I was aware of that till this morning's first news feed. I have difficulties with the morning's first news feed every day. But at any rate, when it was, this funeral is coming up, and I thought, I just can't. I can't handle it. I'm going to be circumambulating this evening. So let's go. Many years ago, when I first got a modem, and it was cool, and I couldn't believe that even this was possible, email and having a modem was like a big thing. Well, I don't know how this happened, and it has been a mystery to me for years. When I was first experiencing being online, I mean really early, and there was some sort of platform, I don't know how I got there, but it was a live streaming feed of text that was an open forum to the world. Anybody in the world could sign up to this site. There were just fleeting lines of text streaming by. There was no framing for this channel at all. No framing to say this is what this is about. It was simply a free, open, global text chat room. And I sat there and looked at all these words and sentences and phrases streaming by from the whole planet. And then I thought, my God, I'm going to do this. And so I put something on, and it flowed away, of course, never to be. No consequence that I would ever know about, because there was no reflexivity in this flow. It was just an endless flow. A friend of mine the other day made a remark just in the chorus of a common sentence. It was just saying, well, you know, as we're, you know, all our flooded timelines are da 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 da. And that phrase flooded timelines was in there. And I thought, wow, yeah, you bet. And of course, no time to stop to attend to that expression because things had already flowed forth. Okay, so I trust you've all read the précis for this evening's discussion, so I'm not going to repeat it, okay? Just for the sake of time. Ultimately, I wish to say this, that we are all symbols for each other. Here and now and always. We are living symbols to each other. If you want to talk about Imago Dei, that's fine with me. We are living, dying symbols to each other. Zoom is a symbol, is it not? Look at it. Oh, I'm going to take a screen cap. That'll be available for $5 as a full color print. Each of us has our own memories, our own dreams, our own reflections, our own experience of ourselves, our own experiences of self. This is a Jung group. Leap. A couple of years ago, or whenever it was, Jeff Keel, who's sitting up there, and Lisa and I went to a Jung conference in Portland. I had never been to Portland, Oregon before, and I can't get into all those stories. Some of them are pretty good. The Jung conference was just fine, just fine. I would have gone for the conference for one reason, and I did not know that reason, and that was to have met Fanny Brewster. Fanny is one of like 3 Black Jungian analysts in America or in the world, I don't know. That's one of Fanny's books. Fanny presented and also presented poetry. And then this book was just coming out, so I ordered it so I would have it right away. This is the story of a Black American Jungian analyst contemplating the agony of mothers having their babies ripped from their arms. The other Black analyst is Samuel Kimball's very important book, really centering on the concept of cultural complexes, I feel. But then also, what is the term? Intergenerational trauma. And Kimball's did a lot of work with that, intergenerational trauma. Okay, so I am almost preaching without notes. Now, when I grew up, the congregation always had a pretty good evaluation of the preacher, particularly a guest preacher. The regular preacher, you know, sort of settled into 0 degrees of freedom. But the guest preachers could go in lots of directions. And there was a pretty good review afterwards of how the sermon had gone. And a preacher who could preach without notes, and a preacher who could preach well without notes. So I'm not there. I'm not there. But I've already told you I went to bed last night trusting the Holy Spirit. It is the season of Pentecost. Okay, Lisa, let's start with visual. We have 23 images this evening. Okay, and if you can make that as large as possible. Larger, if possible. And we're not getting the whole image. No, now I'm not seeing but a little part of the image. Does my screen do anything? Well, reduce it, because now we're not getting enough of the image to see it.
John, you have to go to view and go to full screen. Lisa.
Lisa does, or I do?
Lisa does.
Okay.
Full screen mode down below. There you go.
Oh, hallelujah. So this is page 125 of Jung's Red Book. Some of you are very familiar with the book, and some of you may be indeed familiar with this painting of Jung. This painting, I first saw it well before the Red Book was published. It was the cover on Edward Edinger's book, Transforming the God Image. And I looked at that image, and I hadn't studied this image. It's very well worth study. We're not going to do that tonight. It's actually a very detailed image. I was just taking in the image at large on this book, and I took it with me as my traveling companion to Tennessee, to northeastern Tennessee. And I am a child of the hills and the valleys of northeastern Tennessee. That's where I hail from, 5 generations back anyway. Back to the flatboat days, Daniel Boone, Davy Crockett. Move to the next slide, Lisa. Okay, so to further verify what I'm telling you about, that figure on the left is my maternal, or rather, my paternal great-grandfather. My father's grandfather. On the left, you see him in his Confederate uniform. The sword is out of the scabbard. There's a certain look about the eyes. My paternal great-grandfather won a medal right there, probably at sketching out how the story would really have run, because I do a lot of study. But if he was a courier, and he had been tricked and was trapped on a bridge between Yankees on one side of the bridge and Yankees on the other side of the bridge. They, pulled the trick on him. So he was stuck on the bridge, and they thought they had him cornered. Well, he turned his horse, and he and his horse leapt off the bridge and escaped down the stream. That's the story that has come to me. Now, those of you who are familiar with horses would know that that would be a really incredible thing. To get a horse to do that, to know the horse, to know the stream, to know yourself. Well, he won a medal for that. On the right, you see the medal of that man as an old man. Apparently, he wore that medal every day Looks like it. And he is holding my father. The picture would have been in the year 1916. I know where he's buried. He had a Confederate service marker on his grave. Next slide. Now, so we've established that fact. We're going to circulate a bit on for this phenomenology tonight. I have to show up as myself. I have to allow myself to be a symbol of, as you are and as we are together. What we have here in this photograph is a picture of Oak Grove Baptist Church in Sawmill Holler, as it turned out to be, Mount Carmel, as the name turned out to be, Tennessee. It was founded in 1869, 4 years after the end of the Civil War. Next slide, please. There's the inside of actually a later building. This is my ancestral church. Next slide. No. There we go. Now, if we look at this picture, you don't have to study it hard. The date shows April 1957. I would have been 6 years old. This was the dedication, the first shovel, you see the shovel there, the ground digging for the building of the new church, a new church. I could name 90% of the people in that photograph from 1957. Next. And there's the building that was built from that groundbreaking. That's the church of really the church of my childhood. I knew an earlier building, but at any rate. Next, please. And there's a picture we had a church picture on the steps. This is a detail of everybody on the steps. See if you can find me. I'm 6 years old. Next slide, please. There we go. That's Johnny. Next slide. One of my cells is, as Jung Didion put it, there are many of my former selves I no longer recognize. But I recognize Johnny. Actually, Johnny, never went all that far away. There's the interior of the church. And at age 6, I was baptized in that church, following my own profession of faith in a revival. The baptistry's there in the center for those of you who have no familiarity with the inside of a Baptist church. Front and center with a painting of the River Jordan is actually a tank where baptisms can occur and where mine did occur. Next slide. All right, so quantum leap. Quantum leap. The first philosophy book I think I really read was God, Man, and the Thinker by Donald Wells. I'm sure a steadfast professor at some Midwestern university got his opus out, God, Man, and the Thinker, and I found it in the local public library, and it changed my life. Because in a very calm way, I realized that I could think. I knew the Bible very, very well, actually, and still do. Now, not terribly long after this, I'm not sure when, I brought home another book. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Again, translations, I meant to say that. translations were always very important to me. I remember very much when the New English Bible first came out, I had to have it right away because I wanted to hear the Bible in a different language than a way of speaking than I had heard it at church. Well, to think another way of thinking, I brought home Bertrand Russell's book, Why I Am Not a Christian. Mother found that book and I was reproached, and thus I never brought another philosophy book into the house again. I tried to explain to Mother that I had my own reasons I needed to read this book. But in the end, with all the mother complexities, it was the safest thing to do here is avoidance, total and absolute avoidance of my thinking. So by 1968, I departed after finishing high school, 1968. That year has come up recently in lots of the discussions. And I made my way to Northwestern University, an Appalachian demographic, I imagine in some ways. And on the Northwestern University campus, there is this sculpture, and I'm presenting it to you as a symbol. It's a symbol for me. And the pronunciation, which I will attempt, of the name of this sculpture is L'homme passant une porte. L'homme passant une porte. Man passing through the door. Next slide. So there's, no, there we go. There's the whole sculpture. So now you get a better sense of it. L'homme passant une porte. Man passing through the door. You might note over on the right margin, there's another hand. So from the other side of the door, his hand is extended down and to the left. But then on this side of the door, it is raised. Kind of a superpositioning, I suppose, by Jean-Robert Hypostegui, yeah. Now at Northwestern, I had a professor of philosophy, and I would dedicate this evening's presentation to him, actually. And his name is James M. Edie. Next slide. Professor Edie was, I shall say, only 40 years older. No, not 40 years older. He was about 40 when I met him. That seemed infinitely old, of course, when I was 18. James M. Edie is one of the distinguished philosophers in the American philosophical experience. He studied with Merleau-Ponty himself at the Sorbonne. I attended every session of his that it was possible for me to get into. It was a work of art to hear him lecture. And Professor Edie edited lots of things that I knew about, but then the story, there are a little bit more about those times, though I was writing philosophy, and I remember one professor dismissed my work outright as belle lettres. Of course, it took me about 20 years to get the courage to actually look up what that meant, because I'm sure it was something horrible. But Professor Edie was very open, and I was reading Husserl and reading Merleau-Ponty, and as he told me once, Professor Edie, he said, John, or no, he said, Mr. Dotson, writing on the paper, and professors called their students with that address. Mr. Dotson, you know, you've put together a lot of quotations here in an interesting way, and I like what you've said, but you know, I don't think it can be published. And I thought, my God, be published. I'm just glad you're willing to read it. It was, and I enjoyed his profession. I still have a tendency to need to back up all my statements with a reference, or to give the reference first to justify the statement. If you want to know where that comes from, for me, it comes from the pulpit in that church down in East Tennessee, where everything was linked to the Bible. And one had to back up one's preaching and teaching with scripture references. And that's as deep in me as soup, bean, and cornbread. Soup, beans, and cornbread. Now, Lisa, let's drop the screen for a minute. Drop the screen share for just a second. Okay. So here is what I sent out today for those of you who got it. I had been reading another book of outstanding philosophy that I strongly recommend, this book actually, by Georges Gusdorf on speaking la parole. I've taught this book and I've read it many times. It's highlighted in many colors, Jeff. And I was looking on the back of this book, and you see, you can see what the titles are. And then I saw this title, Christianity and Existentialism, and I noticed that Edie's name was listed as a co-author, not only an editor. He was a distinguished editor, an introducer, you know, all that. And I thought, wow, that's something of Professor Edie's that I haven't read, and I'm sure I need to learn something. So I ordered it. And it was a transformative experience. I guess Professor Edie was a symbol for me. But at any rate, he reappeared. And I read the book very quickly. I strongly recommend it, actually. Eileen got it and read it. And so then I read it, and I was sort of blown away by the connections that I was finding. I mean, again, to revisit patterns of thinking that I haven't really been fully engaged with for many, many years. Formal phenomenology, formal existentialist writing has not been my mainstay in recent years. So it was very pleasant, actually, to return there, but it was more pleasant to discover great value in this book, thanks to Professor Edie. So I'm you know, dedicating this evening to him. I even had a paper with him that I called The Metaphysics of Love. Imagine that. Well, it was the late 60s. I read Kierkegaard at Northwestern. I did read Kierkegaard, and I'm not going to give you my, what do you call it? Your college docket, your list of courses, your curriculum vitae, a transcript. But Kierkegaard is there, and then we can go, you know, phenomenology, existentialism, and so forth. But I did not read Nietzsche in college. Maybe it would have been too soon. Maybe I would have been overwhelmed. I don't know. It's a mystery. I got Nietzsche later, big time, in recent years, big time, including Jung's seminars on Nietzsche's Zarathustra. So I'm going to read from what I PDF'd you today. Just a couple of segments, and some of you may, or most of you probably did not get that. I sent a link with this PDF of just 2 pages, only 2 pages. It's there if and when you want it. But I'm going to read you just a couple of underlined sections. Kierkegaard. Oh, and I have to say, oh my gosh, right here before us, Steve Rosen. Steve Rosen is a philosopher. Steve is on your gallery view. Some of you know Steve. Steve has written some of the best exegesis of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche that I know of. And I can give you that reference. Dimensions of Aperon, one of Steve's, actually earlier in his complete opus. Kierkegaard says that, quote, the most tremendous thing that has been granted to man is the choice, freedom, close quote. Continuing with Edie, but unless he finds something to which he can devote himself without qualification, he will fall into despair, the sickness unto death of which he may be unaware. Only the divine transcendence can justify such undiluted and wholehearted devotion, but it cannot be understood without distortion by our human categories. Hence, from a rationalistic point of view, it is a paradox. It cannot be demonstrated by any objective proofs, but must be encountered in history. And accepted by a faith that involves uncertainty and risk. This existential faith is not a set of doctrines about the universe and its first cause, if there is one. It is rather an arduous way of life that is open to the free individual making maximal use of his or her freedom constantly and with maximum intensity. Kierkegaard felt that the mass Christianity of his time was a casual bowing before a God made in the image of man. This kind of worship made no real difference to anyone. This God was dead. We'll proceed with Nietzsche, the commentary on Nietzsche. No quotes from Nietzsche here. With Nietzsche, these Christian dogmas have degraded them, we're with Nietzsche. These Christian dogmas have degraded the masses of the Western world and reduced them to a condition of slavery. Though this truth has been suppressed in the past by religious power and propaganda, history shows us that man is free to constitute worlds of his own. He alone is able to bring order out of the chaos of history. So according to Nietzsche, it is not merely the traditional image of God, but God himself who is dead. Okay, so we have two platforms to leap off there. Pretty heavy work. I hope everybody's doing okay. Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. We're going to be bringing in Dr. Jung soon enough. I think the real impulse of my feeling a need for this presentation this evening was, again, my deep aching, and it leads me now in a free stream of consciousness to the photographs of those people I just showed you. Those faces of those East Tennessee people in April 1957. No, not a black face amongst them. My church family. And so much, of course, What do we know? We know that we don't know so much that was hidden. Good people, loving church family, and I have no judgment to render on any one of them except maybe one. But I was thinking in all my heart of an agony for what Noel, what is Noel's first name? Bob, I can't remember his first name. But Noel says Mark Noel, the loss of the evangelical mind. And as he says in his book, and I really didn't grow up in an evangelical church per se. The definition takes a whole lot of work. It takes at least 6 books with footnotes and no pictures to get into evangelicalism. Mark Noel is a help, and I've got about 16 more. I've got a stack of books here. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of them. But as he said, the problem with the evangelical mind is that there is none. This is an evangelical scholar, by the way. He's not looking in from the outside. He's looking out from the inside. He's at Yale now. Pretty good gig, I guess. Mark Noel introduced to me a book called The Civil War as a Theological Crisis. And that changed everything. That changed my whole life. You know, your life changes with every breath, right? How many times have our lives changed today? Well, Mark Noel, when I finally saw that the core of the agony is the split in the soul of the people I love. In my 30s and 40s, I would go back, and my father taught the men's Bible study class for, I don't know, 60 years. The classes at Oak Grove were divided by gender. So this was the men's senior Bible study class. And every summer I would go and teach the Sunday school lesson to these elders of my childhood, the men who I knew by smell, sweat, texture of hair on the skin, Masonic rings. These men, and my opportunity was to teach the Bible study class when everybody knows that there's only one door out of that Sunday school class. And they're all getting closer every day. And now they're all gone. Not a one of them is living. So it was torture, actually, in some ways, for me to teach those classes, but it was my calling. Johnny had a calling. And, you know, how could I explain or even begin to? Well, you know, of course, you already know the answer. To say, well, there's a psychologist in Texas. His name is Hillman. And he's coined a term that we could find very useful. Let me offer this framing for you, a little orientation, a little psycholinguistic vehicle. And the term is Christianism. Hillman created that term to describe the experience of Christianity as a cultural ideology, an ism. I have here, and I was hesitant to show you, but this is my Tennessee Journal. The first entry in here was in 2003, and there's still open pages. It covers the deaths of both of my parents and my oldest sister. I have two more sisters and bunches of relatives. But in the back of this journal, I started a drawing, which I don't think can have it can't do any more to it because it's going to just disappear. It's an alchemical vessel there. When I see it, I think of Blake, who said, you know, the flames that form the gates of hell are the same flames that form the gates of heaven. So if we're going to talk about Christianism, that's going to, of course, take a whole lot of work, and you got to be careful. And these days, it could get you a death threat. Martin Luther King was a Christian. And I don't know of anybody who would have a right to question his faith any more than any of us really has a right to question anyone else's faith. I believe Martin Luther King was as he professed to be. But let's back to the deep issues here. What about this death of God that we are talking about in the split soul, not only of the evangelical mind, but of Western civilization? Say amen. I could name everybody on this session and say, I've read your essays, or I will read them. But to say there's a deep problem with the splitting of the soul at the core of our civilizational catastrophe. One way or another. You know, I think the French Revolution is important. And Max, you make a big deal out of the French Revolution, if I remember correctly. I mean, I know you did because I learned this from you and some other reading, but that is how different the French Revolution was from the American Revolution. Now, Max here can teach that lesson, and I'm not going to, but I finally got it. I finally got it, that it was indeed the killing of the king. This was a disruption in the established Christian socio-cultural order that had been in place, what, since the beginning of the medieval era? We have historians online. You can sharpen this up later in a follow-up and bring in dates and all of that stuff. A world order that changed when the king was killed. This did not happen with the American Revolution. You have to remember, the king was ordained. The king was designated by God. The king was God's own man. Just beginning to sound familiar? And so with the French Revolution, there was death. But what happens when world orders enter chaos and catastrophe? Probably need a pause there. (2020) Ringing anybody's bells?
Rebirth. Death, life.
Well, I can assure you that 2020 is going to have a symbolic power for humanity from this time forward. Shall we review now the history of the 20th century? Shall we go from in reverse order? Shall we start in 1999 and back up, step by step, catching the birthdays of everybody here present? I'm reading a very powerful book now titled simply 1947. Prize-winning book. So I was asked recently, and actually it was you, Lisa, and you said 1947, what was that about? You weren't born yet. I said, no, but a lot of things were going on. The refugees in Europe were in chaos. Those released from the concentration camps and all of the chaos. All those stories. The partition of India and Pakistan, which led to wholesale slaughter of thousands of people. Russia tested their first atomic bomb in 1947. George Orwell wrote 1984 in 1947. So we go on and on and on and deeper and deeper and deeper. That's what we do, though. That's what our work is about. It is digging deeper and deeper and deeper. So let's have the next slide, Lisa, and we'll do a little digging. It's going to be hard work, I warn you. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be pleasant. Thank you, Professor Edie. Next slide, please. Okay.
Call from Selvig Dylan.
Everybody soaking this up? I happen to be an Episcopalian, a parishioner at St. James, clerk of the vestry, for many years. This was after my Roman Catholic phase, which was after my Hindu phase in college, and Alan Watts phase, and a gazillion other phases, just like you, a gazillion other phases. But as an Episcopalian, I am offended by this image. And you all know the story. Your timeline is as flooded as mine. Your news feed is as saturated as mine. So I will just make my stand and say this very simply. As an Episcopalian, if you want, I'll go further. As a Christian, I am offended by this image. Offended is a word I don't use. I guess I just used it. Next slide. So my psychological premise is this, just what we've already read. If God is dead, those forces go somewhere. They go somewhere else. That's what Jung has to tell us also. There will be symbols, and there will be blood. There sure has been. I don't know how my great grandfather did back in Hawkins County in Tennessee, because Tennessee was very divided. Where I come from precisely was the ground of which it is said brother against brother, father against son. That was the way it was. With savage brutality, people who would have helped each other harvest are suddenly committing acts of atrocities upon each other. I thought the Civil War had ended. I grew up thinking that the Civil War had ended. I remember the centennial of the Civil War in 1961. And I did not fully appreciate how much had been hidden, how much had been buried. Now, I wasn't blind. I grew up in a Jim Crow community. I didn't know that term. I had all the understandings that were in place in the Jim Crow reality. I didn't see it. I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. I am understanding it better now. Next image. Jung is going to say it very well here in just a few minutes, so I'm not going to try to say it. The energies go somewhere. The energies of what people need and want and crave and believe. And the God, as Jung says, you might as well call it a God. We're going to read this passage in a minute. You can call it something else if you want to, but you might as well call it a God. That's what Dr. Jung says. We'll get to it. Okay, Lisa, we'll stop the screen share for a moment. We'll take a little pause. We're used to having some sort of pause in the middle of everything. I strongly recommend this book. It's upside down. And you see this is new and very powerful scholarship. The Baptism of Early Virginia, How Christianity Created Race. Did you get that? Heavy. How Christianity Created Race. Now, this is a full tilt mainline scholar. She's got her credentials, folks. She's got the curriculum vitae. She's got it all. I forget where she is now. She's at Rice. This is very serious work, no joke. Another important work for me by another younger scholar. Bodies of Belief, Baptist Community in Early America. How can I lose books when it's only me? Ah, because I had it face down. And then this book, which Bob Strayer connected me with, which is really actually blowing me away. How, when slavery was called freedom. Evangelicalism, pro-slavery, and the causes of the Civil War. And I read the first chapter in this book, and it was like a heavy hit of a very dangerous drug. He's got me at the core. Where do you get to be if you truly believe with all the God Almighty ferocity that you can possibly believe anything, that slavery is a form of freedom? Black chattel slavery. Where do you have to get to for that to be a devout religious belief? Lots of paradoxes in American history between Thomas Jefferson's package of denial and duplicity. And yet, as we all know, Jefferson was a very complex man. A lot more complex than Andrew Jackson. I don't think Jackson was very complex. I went to Andrew Jackson Elementary School. This is a good history. I recommend this scholar. I follow him on Facebook. And he basically tells the same story. You can find that I've got 25 books in here that will tell the parameters of this story. This is another one by Kendi. This is very big right now. I think this is on, like a major bestseller in America at the moment. Here's one I had to throw in just because actually I reported on this once. And this takes us deeper still. This is another very capable younger scholar. And unfortunately, now most people who are doing active work in the universities are younger than I am. I don't know how that happened. But this book is about the dreams in the Civil War times. And they were recorded avidly, because in those days, sharing one's dreams was quite a strong cultural phenomena in the writing of letters to sweethearts and family members. There's also, as this author says, and I'm with him, he says, the study of the dreams of individuals in the Civil War is the sine qua non of comprehending what people were actually experiencing. And you think about it, our dreams can be a portal to intimacy. But this book has dreams of soldiers on both sides, and women in their positions at the time. Okay, end of pause. Okay. I think we're doing fine for time. Actually, we won't. I hope this push isn't too much, but I just got to get it out. Then we'll talk. Oh, and we got to hear from Dr. Jung. By all means, Dr. Jung. Next slide, please. And thank you, Lisa, for doing this. It's a huge help, really. I'd be more klutzy than I already am if I were trying to do this. Next, yeah, the next. Oh, thank you. I have a lot of communication networks on Facebook. I consider it an obligation and a responsibility. I have lots of friends, very deeply engaged with friends from my hometown back in Tennessee, and relatives, and then other phenomenologists around the world. So I shared this with Jeff Cohn. I don't know if Jeff is still with us or not, but Jeff is the rector at St. James. We were talking about Bible study. And so this meme came up. I think it's supposed to be funny. It's not funny, however, when Jeff Keel writes and cites the horsemen of the apocalypse as symbols when Jeff is writing about global climate catastrophe. And Jeff knows what he's talking about. The climate change issue is not going to recede into some basement closet of psychological denial. It ain't going to happen that way. And you would have to be a total liar to be untruthful about the crisis that we are now experiencing and are going to be experiencing. I have hope. I have 4 grandchildren. I can't look at them without hope. Can't do it. The youngest is 6 months. The oldest is 10 years. I look at them and say, hey, you're going to be looking at your granddaddy in a grave someday. I hope everything has turned out well. Next slide. So I also stay in touch by Facebook back home in Tennessee. And I was in radio for many, many years. I was actually involved with radio and public radio for over 30 years. And I stay in touch with the local news online now. I grew up, these were the only 2 channels we could get with rabbit ears, aerials. And you had to, some of you may remember, shifting the aerials, trying to get a picture, and all the joys of the early television technology, part of our boomer lore. On Monday, when Donald Trump raised overhead a Bible, the sword of the Spirit to believers, he unwittingly cleaved his loyal Christian supporters into 2 camps. His most ardent evangelical supporters saw it as a blow against evil and described his walk from the White House to St. John's Episcopal Church over ground violently cleared of protesters as a, quote, Jericho walk, unquote. I think that's a symbol. The Reverend Johnny Moore described these terms. I will never forget seeing at POTUS at real Donald Trump slowly and in total command walk from the White House across Lafayette Square to St. John's Church, defying those who aim to derail our national healing by spreading fear, hate, and anarchy, after just saying, I will keep you safe. So there's one take. I'll mail you the PDF. Anybody you want to check something later. Next slide. Okay, deep breath. So I have been referring to the current president as the father of lies. Now, that's a symbolic statement. Not everybody knows that rubric. But for me, it comes from a childhood memory. And we had a lot of Bible. But a phrase from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 44, and he abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in it. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So I thought, well, hey, I'm going to enter my opinion. I'm entitled to an opinion. Everybody's got lots of opinions these days. We got floods of opinions, and I get one. I get one opinion. Hey, that's the way it is back in East Tennessee. You get your opinion. Supposed to. Next slide. In terms of the sermon I'm delivering, unfortunately, but I actually had a Facebook exchange with a person once who said that the absolute word of God is the King James Version of the Bible printed in 1611, and there is no need for any interpretation. End of thread. Well, I happen to have here, and you can go on Amazon and get your own copy of the 1611 version of the King James Bible. I don't think this was the one that was in the photographs we saw earlier, but this is actually an exact reproduction of the 1611 King James Bible. It's actually very, very hard to read, not only because of the print, but because of various idiosyncrasies of published English at that time that later versions of the King James consistently and steadily standardized. So when this friend was citing the 1611 version of the Bible, I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but I have some, I have a pretty clear feeling. What did he mean? What did he mean? The absolute word of God is the King James Version of the Bible printed in 1611. And he said that was it. And I would say the term for that would be bibliolatry. It's a form of idolatry. And idolatry is a serious sin. In fact, in the Hebrew tradition, idolatry is the original and most profound sin of all. It's valuing one's own opinions above God Almighty. Next slide, please. So more of the same news feed we had earlier. But evangelicals are not monolithic. This is a Guardian article. Some saw the gesture as cynical, a ploy by a president whose decisions, both private and public, do not align with biblical principles. I guess it's sort of a Rorschach test then, said Dallas pastor Robert Jeffries, who is one of Trump's most important defenders. You see what you expect to see. So shall we redo our unit on synesthesia? But that's not true. Trump's emerging evangelical critics say an objective measure is contained in the very book Trump wielded. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the merciful. It's right there in the Sermon on the Mount, said John Fay, a professor of American history at Messiah College. I don't know where that college is. Just read Jesus. Well, there's an idea. Next slide. Symbols. We're talking about symbols of transformation. Here's the BBC symbol, and there's a headline. I don't know anything about the contributor who created that headline. And when I grew up, we did a lot of talking about original sin, I promise. And a lot of preaching of the book of Revelation. I'm no stranger to the book of Revelation. But original sin, this is just a regular straight old headline out there. Viewpoint, U.S. must confront its original sin to move forward. Because I'm sure several, if not all of you, have heard this expression of, I would say this though, and I have to take one exception. I have to express this opinion. Black chattel slavery is surely an original sin in the creation of this country, but also was the brutalization to what we now say the level of genocide. That's a term was invented in 1947, by the way. It was invented for the Nuremberg trials. Read the book. That term, the guy who created that term and said, we've got to have a term for this. If we don't have a term for this, people are not going to talk about it, and we're not going to have a framing. We have to have a word. This guy basically sacrificed much of his life fighting for his word. He finally got it, and it was entered officially into human discourse in the Nuremberg trials in 1947. The term is genocide. Original sin. Well, we can take that up. Dr. Jung, by the way, has quite a lot to say about it. Certainly to this gist, and that is original sin just don't go away like that. God may go away, but original sin sticks around. Okay, next slide, please. And then let's go to gallery view, go back to gallery view. We're heading to the finish line here. And remember, as of last night at this time, I wasn't sure where this all was going to go. So here's Jung, volume 11. Just a couple of passages. Religion is a relationship to the highest or most powerful value be it positive or negative. Religion is a relationship to the highest or most powerful value, be it positive or negative. But then again, back to our clincher for the evening. Religion doesn't go away no matter how you change your language. That's the view of analytical psychology. You can proclaim God dead all day long and work with that. You can work with that. You may have to work with that. But that doesn't mean that the highest and most important value is just vanishing because of a psychological enigma and a psycholinguistic labyrinth. Okay, this is it. All the way home here. This is a couple of pages on. Nietzsche thought himself quite conscious and responsible when he smashed the old tablets. Yet he felt a peculiar need to back himself up with a revivified Zarathustra, a sort of alter ego with whom he often identifies himself in his great tragedy, Thus Spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche was no atheist, but his God was dead. The result of this demise was a split in himself, and he felt compelled to call the other self Zarathustra, or at other times Dionysus. In his fatal illness, he signed his letter Zagreus, the dismembered god of the Thracians. The tragedy of Zarathustra is that because his God died, Nietzsche himself became a god. And this happened because he was no atheist. He was of too positive a nature to tolerate the urban neurosis of atheism. It seems dangerous for such a man to assert that God is dead. He instantly becomes the victim of inflation. Far from being a negation, God is actually the strongest and most effective position the psyche can reach. I'm going to do that one again. God is actually the strongest and most effective position the psyche can reach, in exactly the same sense in which St. Paul speaks of people whose God is their belly. The strongest and therefore the decisive factor in any individual psyche compels the same belief or fear, submission or devotion, which a God would demand from man. Anything despotic and inescapable is in this sense God. And it becomes absolute unless by an ethical decision freely chosen, one succeeds in building up against this natural phenomenon a position that is equally strong and invincible. Man is free to decide whether God shall be a spirit or a natural phenomenon, like a craving of a morphine addict, and hence whether God shall act as a beneficent or a destructive force. So my soul aches for many of the people in my childhood who some of whom I still know, and I don't, still in touch with, as to how God is doing these days. And what are the symbols that are carrying this power? In church or nowhere near a church? And my soul aches for many other splittings, often the topics of our evenings together. So I'm not going to create an inventory of splittings with the decline of the mechanical worldview in physics and the rise of speed of light technologies and vast powers of cyber manipulation. And another time we can take that up. But the splitting of the soul, the rising powers of various symbols, pseudologia fantastica is a term that Jung uses in his collective psychology for mass psychology, mass derangement. Pseudologia, pseudo-logos, the false logos. Fantastica, the same root as fantasy, and it's actually the root of phenomenon, all of that. It's an apparitional thing. It's an apparition, like a ghost in your midst. Pseudologia fantastica, like perhaps the visitation of dead ancestors. And that is stating a lie so often and so consistently that one believes the lie is the truth. That's from Dr. Jung. So Lisa, let's show the next slide. That's all the talk. Talk is over. Let's show one more slide. Just to speak of symbols, and this presentiated, this is simply a photograph of my sculpture studio where I'm standing right now. And that was the first light of dawn. I am a worshiper of the dawn. Aurora Consurgent. And that was the morning light in the studio. And so Lisa, one more slide and that's it, we're done. At the bottom of Jung's painting is the city, and this illuminates a dream, but the bottom is also, you can't see it, I don't think, on your screen. If you don't know the drawing, you're not going to be able to do this. But there's a group of military people down at the bottom. If you go up, yeah, there we go. Yeah. You see a group of soldiers firing at targets down at the bottom. Then it looks like a nice Swiss house with a fence, a yard, and a fountain. And over on the right is a cannon and a bunker. And then out in the distance, we see the factories. And there's a train actually pulling in. The steam is from the train. Some on this phone call may be able to, indeed, to speak more to this painting than I can. I have lived it. I've studied it a bit. I haven't studied it exhaustively. I don't remember what the big building is, except probably just Western civilization. Okay, we can. So that's it. I did not foresee this evening's presentation coming. I did have my strange feelings about 2020, I don't know, for the last 10, 15 years. Maybe always. Should we take a breather? Should we take a break? Somebody want to go get a glass of water?
I was just going to say that I saw something coming in 2020, but I could not have anticipated this. Yeah.
Well, we're in the thick of it, as we know, we all know, everyone here knows. The pandemic is recognizable and describable and not predictable. At best, partially predictable. Basic chaos theory. A viral storm. And as we all know, the perils that don't go away because we decide to do something else or go watch a TV show. Right now, the probability would be this is the first of several pandemics along that are heading this way. If you want to believe that our friends in the Silicon Valley are going to come up with quick silver bullets, it ain't going so well so far.
You know, and I want to thank you.
If we want to think of 2020 as a werewolf.
So John, thank you
It's
so
just connecting silver bullets. And sorry.
I'm not sure I understood that, Shane, but we can get back to you. Okay,
So
go ahead.
I want to thank you. I want to add, just to start with, is that there's a focus on the despair, and that's kind of like where we have to start.
Right.
And maybe the name to add to the mix is Darwin, which, you know, if we're looking at human nature, that there isn't, and this is part of what Jung is talking about too, right? Is that we're going to integration, and I think with integration, we can actually discover that there's really nothing destructive in there, that it all, in the process of incorporating, that there's every part of our nature is something that's there to give us life, whether we're going to, you know, to do it just for the sake of reproduction or the sake of, you know, providence, or yeah, whatever, however you want to frame it. But there's something there, just to throw out.
Providence. That's an extremely big concept in American history. Providence. God shall provide. But at any rate, if we want to talk about Darwin, we can talk about Darwin. Jung's certainly has a sense of the natural sciences and of biology, and he's not alien to discussions of some of the basic archaic powers, let's say of extinction, since we're in the midst of an extinction, which is taking hold bigger time every day. So we can talk about extinction. Jung says, my concern is with those who are suffering.
Could I say something?
Eileen, sure.
Thank you for the presentation. It was moving and heartfelt and explorative and wise. I'm wondering about the Christian symbolism. It has such a toxic history. Jung resuscitated it, or he thought it was very powerful, and he used it. But is it time to really do what Nietzsche said and kind of retire those old gods? They haven't done us much good so far, and we are on our own. Your book, the lovely book that you referenced, the phenomenology and existential philosophy, basically sort of comes to that final conclusion that yes, we need to have meaning, but we also need our independence from the symbols. And those terrible symbols from the South, they're all mixed up with slavery. And I think we need to dispense with them mindfully, vigorously, violently, get rid of them. And does that mean, where does that put Jung? Well, he's not tied to those symbols. He's just tied to the fact that there will be symbols, and the god Pan, the goddess nature. I mean, symbols can come out of this time that are not so freighted.
Let me respond to that directly, Eileen. One quick, the issue of Black slavery, of course, in America is not only a Southern historical issue.
I know.
Yeah, you don't have to go very far to find that out. But here's what John Wilde, that's perfect. Just to share with you some more of the language of existential phenomenology. It could even be called Christian existentialism. If Christianity is to be revived, it will reappear with very different symbols and attitudes, Professor Wilde is saying. And I'll finish with just a passage here. If there is any divine plan, it is that man should, we'll go with man inclusively, man should become free and responsible. If he does not do so, he is to blame. And in his heart, he knows this. God is not responsible for Hiroshima, Buchenwald, and Auschwitz. If Christianity is to survive after Kierkegaard, it must be understood not so much as a set of doctrines or propositions to be believed by an inactive intellect, but rather as a way of existing and understanding the world. With trust in the unlimited freedom and inexhaustible meaning of a creative source that is present, though concealed, in our human history. This trust in transcendence can help us to transcend ourselves and the fixed rules and meanings into which our lives are constantly crystallizing. It is beyond all codes and explanations. We need new concepts and patterns of meaning to clarify it, but there is no living culture which is wholly oblivious to its creative style of action. It enables men to break through the endless round of hatred and revenge, into which our social life is ceaselessly falling, by acts of forgiveness, through which they are able to transcend the past and to begin again, by stirring up feelings of remorse and real repentance. It enables the individual person to face his own guilty past from a distance and to embark on a new course.
Yes.
I think that's completely commensurable with Jung. And other Jungians may wish to take a shade of meaning there. But yeah, that's completely commensurable with Jung, except Jung goes deeper still, much, much deeper still. If you wish, in my opinion, if you wish to travel with Jung.
How so?
Jung, Pardon?
Can you, how so? How does he go so? Because he is using, he says he's using the Christian myth as the most powerful of symbols that he has in his repertoire. How can he go deeper? I want to know, but I'm not disputing. I just am interested
yeah.
in.
If one does the work with Jung and enters the work and enters it, you arrive, and actually this brings up another juncture for us in my associational mind, Lisa, with your presentation last week on mass individuation. When Lisa raised that question, and she said, I want to do a seminar on mass individuation, I said, well, I don't think that framing actually works. Feeling professorial as I did. But then Lisa said, well, I think I want to do it anyway. And many of you were present for that last week. And then I told her a couple of weeks later, and I said it with a little trepidation because people are touchy these days. And I said, Lisa, in one sense, talking about mass individuation is talking about church. Now, Lisa is a non-recovered Catholic, so I knew not to bring this up. But in all seriousness, Eileen, it is the living out of the living symbols. And Jung says, if this leads you, as it does me, to a full embrace, as I will say, of my own Christian practice, which in terms of the praxis thereof, I identify as alchemy, then we can have that conversation. Others on this session here this evening can speak in many different languages that as far as are commensurable, and my heart is open. I'm a very religious person, and I am a Christian, but then I'm a post-Kierkegaardian Christian. Just what he just said. Becoming a Christian is always becoming. And he says, maybe in any given generation, maybe one or two. So, the way is narrow to even think that one would even identify oneself in such a way. But that furthers our conversation. So where I'm weaving this circumambulation with you, Eileen, is to say, I'm in for the conversation. I'm in for the conversation with everybody here. I'm in for every conversation with anyone, my intention is to love neighbor as myself. So we keep the conversation going. Okay, I better stop there.
I had a question.
Shane.
Where the hell do you go after Kierkegaard says something like, "Oh, there will only be one or two in each generation"? Like, is it just following the signals you get that this is the right way to, like, continually? Is that the process of becoming, like, maybe where it has something to do with Jung's individuation, like just following your signals of what this is what I think I need to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know you, Shane, to have a context for what you've just said. Yes. That actually brings to my mind prophecy, oddly enough. It also takes me to Jung's sense of prophecy. What did Jung have to say about the future of humanity and his own hopes, and how that connected with his best discernings, his best reckonings, his best faith, and Kierkegaard likewise. Well, Kierkegaard really set it out to say, this is a very intense personal responsibility here. This is not a joke. It's very, very important. And the guy seemed to have been quite depressed. The sickness unto death, fear and trembling. He also felt himself, and here this statement may be a bit of an overreach. He felt himself alienated from his culture, which he felt was a decadent and hollow, non-religious culture. And again, that may have been overstating the case, but sort of that was Kierkegaard's view, and that it was very hard to shake people out of a trance, the trance of everyday life.
Can I ask one more question? What were his methods of transcending that then? Like, I know he had bright moments, and I just like, but I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about it.
Kierkegaard?
Yes.
Question. Yeah, honestly, I would love to defer to Steve Rosen on that one, but I don't want to put you on the spot, Steve. Would you feel like responding to that? If not, I can make an answer of some sort.
Well, I could give it a shot if the question is made more specific.
Okay. I guess was his solution to this, all right, like his problems with depression, it was something like find one goal above all else and like try and go for it. Is that like reasonable?
Well, my understanding of Kierkegaard is that he was intent on embracing paradox, taking a leap into radical uncertainty and embracing paradox. For him, that was where divinity lay. And he rejected certainty, especially rationally crafted certainty. He rejected that. And certainty and uncertainty entered into a dialectic, weaving around each other. So a simpler way of saying it is,
Wow.
if you're a rationalist and you want to understand Kierkegaard, good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Max.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't see any other hands. Anyway, Max.
okay. Thank you, John, for your very dense presentation. I just want to say a couple of things. I think, and you addressed that in your presentation. So the fundamental problem of Western modernity is its attempt to get rid of a transcendence. And we know that it's not possible. In a certain way, when you try to do it, transcendence comes back from somewhere, an open window or an open door, and what you get is very often the shadow of a transcendence. And then the transcendence, we can call it God, or can be defined as a symbol, becomes the opposite of a symbol. If the symbol is there to unify, in Greek, symbolum, the shadow of a symbolum is the diabolicum, and the dia is the division. And I think that is actually what is going on in modernity, because of that attempt to get rid of transcendence. I wanna read one line from President Trump's speech to the people of Poland in 2017. He said, he's talking about the West. He said, it's a rhetorical question. He asked, do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert and destroy it. What is interesting is in his hands, but it's not just, I think Trump is more a symptom, is a manifestation of something, is a manifestation of the sickness of the modern world, in which things can be defined only in a very polemical way. So civilization can only be defined if you have an enemy. It can only be defined if you have to defend the civilization against something else. And I think this is one of the implications of this modern attempt to get rid of transcendence, that everything splits and everything has to find and has to find and has to be defined through opposition.
In my mind, you've just described social media to a considerable extent as to where that antinomy has now transformed into cyber space, shall we say. And the distinctions between the cinesthetic cyberspatial iconography of what is real, what is actual, in text, in image, and whatever. There's a transpermeability here. I just to take on one more thing. This is a very powerful book. Ricoeur is in the same group with these other phenomenologists. Very, very good work here. And yes, if we're dealing with symbolism, and Dr. Jung is right there, we're not just talking about a one-sidedness.
Okay, can I jump in here?
Absolutely.
Thank you. You know, you mentioned a couple of times that new symbols are needed. And now you just said, you know, we can't have this one-sidedness. And there have been various like approaches toward something like a Klein bottle as a symbol, or at least, you know, what the Klein bottle represents that can be used in further symbology. So the profound unification of opposites without the destruction of the opposites into a synthesis. And the dynamism of process going from one to the other, and things like that. Do you think that might be an answer to those calls for a new symbol?
L'homme passant une porte. Man passing through the door. Yes, I think, and a lot of the work that this group has done through the decades in our conversations, to say what are the openings? Is this an aporia? Is this a no exit, no escape journey? Again, the absence of God. And then what you were just saying, and that was leading in many directions, not only this one direction that I tripped with. Avoidance of the transcendental, and to expand that, which is a term that's very important in phenomenology. But I know your work well enough, Max, that you're also speaking of this in a deep historical context in terms of the transcendent in European culture, if I may so characterize some of your work. But there again, this is the issue we're talking about with the death of God and these vast pronouncements against European culture by Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, all the continental philosophers. And then again, just to fractal, if you forgive me, fractaling forth, we have to fractal into Darwin, yes, who said man is not all man has fantasized himself to be, and Marx, who says man is primarily a perverted fantasy of manipulative powers. And then we have Freud, who comes and says man is purely a product of our sexual drives. Although again, those are some pretty big generalizations in a row. But where is the transcendent? Where is the transcendent in Marx? I believe Marx is a rationalist. I believe Hegel is rationalism. So to say that rationalism doesn't really go together with the transcendent.
If I may just, in Hobbes' Leviathan, his attempt to get rid of the transcendence as a result that the people, what we can call the nation, it's not the people plural, it's the people as a singular, as a unity, becomes the transcendent. The people becomes something that can only exist in its unity through representation. He uses theological categories in order to describe the nation as a unity and totality. And then we have a new religion, nationalism, that can only survive through oppositions and war.
There was a path taken there with Hegel and German idealism, and well, of course, we have to deal with good and evil. Eileen is going to take care of this later in the summer. She's going to lead us in a seminar on the problem of evil, which was certainly a primary concern of Jung. And what I can't believe I haven't mentioned it tonight, but what would be the quintessentially important book of Jung on the topics we're really talking about tonight, and that is Answer to Job.
One thing I was going to say about Hobbes is that I think Hobbes definitely seems like he retains an element of the transcendental in his new, like in his formulation. There's still an element of the people that's transcendent. And like if somebody told me they were a Hobbesian, like I wouldn't be scared. I'd be like shaking hands with that person. Like there's still an element there that retains a vitality, I guess.
A vitality by means of the transcendental?
Right. By the
Whitehead made a statement that the function of civilization is self-transcendence. Whitehead's always reaching out there. But at the very, and this would take what you've said, Max, and what you've said, Lisa, and your discussion last week on mass individuation. And also bring in Norman O. Brown if we want. A couple of you would appreciate that. But Norman O. Brown spoke of mass prophecy. Mass prophecy. Is that what's erupting now, minute by minute? Oh, wait, well, then we better talk about
I don't even know what that means.
What prophecy is.
Right.
As and individuation as well. And we can go right in there if we want. We can walk through that door. We can pass through that door. The prophecy in the depths means an awareing, an integral awareing that is atemporal. Thus, there are no sharp distinctions between past, present, and future, but rather, as to use Steve Rosen's term, there's a transpermeability, I believe, if I'm using the term correctly, of past, present, and future. I believe that indeed this is what is happening. Much of what's happening in the cinesthetic field includes a mass anamnesis. That's sort of what we're experiencing now. An anamnesis in psychotherapy, psychotherapists know, and I'm not one of those, but is the necessary recollection of what has been forgotten, which then is going to lead to what has been denied and what is in the shadow. And we sure see a whole lot of stuff volcanically erupting out of the shadow. There's no surprise. There's no surprise. I mean, I thought when I was a kid, I thought the Civil War was over. Eileen?
But what we're dealing with now is also the pragmatics on the ground of people who are losing their livelihoods. And so it's something that ideology or injustices that could fester now have to erupt because there's no alternative to this eruption, because people can't live without some kind of justice in the short term. They will, as they are, dying, black and brown people dying beyond much beyond white people. I mean, it's sort of facing us right now, and something has to be done. It just has to be done. If it's not going to be done one way, it will be done in a violent way, but something has to be done for some justice at this rupture point. It is sort of beyond discussion what is happening, don't you think? And it's going to be up to a lot of people putting themselves on the line to make some fruitful change. And fortunately, we have a bigot who's an ideal target, even for people now who are just changing their allegiance because he is so dysfunctional. I mean, this is the time, right? There can be no more cataclysmic time than what's coming up.
Cataclysm actually that comes from the word baptism. So we are enduring a baptism. The symbology of baptism is death. From which new life.
One thing I wanted to mention, I'm trying to map this out symbolically in my head. And the image that came to me was the outside rushing into the center, like literally. So with the riots, the marginalized rushing into the center, and that fits with baptism, running over the center, the earth, the outside running over the island, and it also fits with oh gosh, yeah, it just seems like that fits symbolically. Just the image of the marginal going over the center. And there might have been another thought there, but that was the general idea when I was trying to think about it or map it out.
An interesting expression of that, again, is a sense of flooding time. Past, present, and future are erupting and converging. I think with the pandemic as well, putting everybody off the established time metrics for the most part. So that time is warping as to what is past, present, and future. Gebser describes
Jeez.
atemporality as an aspect of the transmutation of consciousness that is now happening. It's after 9 o'clock, folks. You know me. I'm here.
Interesting.
Folks, it's 9 o'clock, and if anyone needs, wants, by all means, go in as andamo in pacem ma andamo. Go in peace, but go.
Thanks, John.
That's beautiful.
Okay,
Yeah, I probably should go, but it was great talking to you.
great always to be together. Any medium.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye bye, Eileen. Bye, everybody.